Hi, everyone. Welcome to Katie Couric. You know, the skills your baby learns in early childhood could play a huge role in how successful he or she becomes as an adult. But can skills like self-control and patience be taught? My guest is Galinsky, president and co-founder of the Families and Work Institute. And she's got a new book out called Mind in the Making, the 7 Essential Life Skills Every Child Needs. And before our conversation starts, I'd like to say a quick thank you to the sponsor of our web show, Dove. Hey, Ellen, nice to see you.
So nice to see you.
So tell me a little bit about this book. God knows the shelves at Barnes & Noble and smaller independent bookstores are full of child development books. So why did the world need another one?
Exactly. I asked myself the same question. We started out actually to just do videos and I wasn't going to write a book. I started out because I was very concerned about what was happening to learning among children in this country. I was going to do one of my, you interviewed me for Ask the Children, the book that I did about how kids feel about their employed mothers and fathers. I was going to do a study on how kids feel about learning. But when I went out and talked to them, they were dead on arrival. Basically, their faces were flat, their eyes were expressionless. I couldn't get them to have any energy at all around learning. And then you think of a young child and how you can't stop them from learning. And so my question was, what do we do to children in this country to have them drop out of learning? They're not just dropping out of school, some of them, a lot of them are dropping out of learning. So that was my question, and the solution was to go out and film the best research on how kids learn, birth through 8, and to share that with teachers and with families and with the interested public.
So how old were these kids you talked to about learning who seemed
3rd
pretty
through the 12th grade.
Glazed over? Really?
All over the country.
And certainly some must have been kind of jazzed and excited about learning. I mean, you can't generalize that much, can you?
Well, I would go in and I would ask them to tell me about a time. First, I started by trying to ask them about a time when they were learning. And so then I asked them about a time when they weren't learning. It could be school, it could be, but not just school. It could be at home with their friends, with a video game, anything. And I just wasn't getting much of a reaction. They all translated immediately to school. And they could talk about when they weren't learning a lot easier than they could talk about learning. And they also, when they talked about learning, they talked about it as extrinsic. I said, it's important to learn so that I, and most kids said, so that I can get a job and not be a bum on the street. And that's a good, that's a very good reason. But I couldn't get them to talk about wanting to learn, and that echoes a study of 81,000 kids. When they were asked why they went to school, they mostly said that it was, again, extrinsic reasons, or because it was the law, or to see their friends, and only 39% said that they went to school to learn.
So there wasn't a real love of learning
but I
that
could
you
get
sensed.
there. I could get there, but I had to really pull teeth to get there.
Did you say, gosh, we have to figure out what we're doing wrong in this country? Mm-hmm. So is that sort of the premise from which you started?
That was where I started.
And
no intention to write another book to clutter our shelves.
And what did you find out? What are we doing wrong?
Well, what I found was that because I do so much workforce research, and I had done 3 or 4 studies on the skills that employers thought were missing from the workforce, or skills that employees thought that they didn't have when they went into the workforce. I did another study on the top 100 people, men and women, top 100 women, top 100 men in companies, about what their most important skills were. So I'd done lots of studies about skills of adults, and I began to see that these skills were emerging in children from these videos that we were making. And what I realized we were doing wrong is that these skills do emerge, but we're not promoting them. So we're busy teaching kids content, but we're not teaching them what I think of as life skills. Not only
or study habits, if you will, or life habits, I guess, right?
Exactly. I started to call them learning skills, and then I ended up calling them life skills, and I called them life skills because they help kids now and they help kids in the future. So if you're 3 and you can learn how what your teacher might expect of you, or 5 and your teacher might expect of you, that's a skill for now, but it's also a skill for when you're having a fight with your husband or your wife, or you wonder what your boss expects of you.
It sounds like you're focused on emotional intelligence in a way, right?
More so.
How people, not regurgitating facts or memorizing information, but figuring out ways to conduct yourself, to negotiate. sort of through the learning process and through the life process. Would that be a fair assumption?
Well, that's a great assumption. One of the things that made me the happiest was that when my editor read the book, she said, "This is the best thing I've read since Emotional Intelligence." And I went, "Wow, that's fabulous. I'm thrilled." But but it's also some skills that are not as a part of, we don't think of as emotional intelligence. Things like being able to focus, to pay attention in a Google world, a world that is very distracting,
right.
or self-control, or being an engaged lifelong learner. That, those skills are critical thinking, or making connections. If you look at making connections, that's the basis of all learning. We have to learn that something stands for something else to see the connections, but the people who see the unusual connections are the people, that's creativity, but the people who actually can be very successful in a world that's full of too much information.
So let's go over the 7 basic life skills that you say we should really get our children to adopt,
right.
that will make them successful adults. So you just
and
said,
kids.
And kids, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So the ability to focus is one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the ability to connect. Well, here, you name them for me. That'll make it much easier than my guessing it.
It took me a while to learn them all in order. Because I kept changing their names too. The first one I call focus and self-control, and that's to pay attention and to, let me just step back for a minute. All of the skills involve the prefrontal cortex of the brain, and they're what researchers call executive functions. And some people hate that because it sounds like a guy in a pinstripe suit bossing you around in your brain, but it's not. It's the way we pull together our emotions, our social competencies, and our intellectual competencies in pursuit of goals. So that's the underlying brain function for all of the skills, and they involve things like being able to pay attention, to be able to remember a couple of things at the same time, to be able to think flexibly, and to inhibit that desire to go on automatic. So that's what executive functions are,
right.
And all of these call on that. So sorry about that little detour.
That's all right. With that background, then, what are the skills, the 7 skills?
Focus and self-control, and that is the ability to pay attention, but also not go on automatic. So if you're going to pursue your goal, but you'd really feel like not, reading the script right now, getting ready for this interview, but you'd rather go do something else. I mean, how important it is to your job and to my job, and to our lives to be able to pursue our goals and not just do what we feel like doing, but
right.
but stop. And
so is that discipline, being self-disciplined?
Self-discipline, exactly.
Okay, so that's one. Tell me the others.
The second one is perspective taking, and that is a skill that Peter Drucker, who's the father of modern management, calls an inside-out perspective. That's knowing what others like, don't like, think, feel. It's the basis for the most successful new businesses. How would we know that we needed an iPod until someone understood what customers didn't have and what they might need? It's that kind of skill. But for little kids, it's understanding what the characters in the book think and feel. Is it
empathy,
your teacher.
really?
It's more than empathy. It is empathy, but it's what they call a social cognition skill. I know research language is
That's okay.
charming,
That's okay. Yeah. But it's the ability to know what people want, what is expected of you,
yes.
or just sort of have a sense of the outside world and what makes it tick.
Well, they call it in research actually theory of mind. It's to understand what is going on in someone else's mind. That's what it means.
Okay.
And I call it perspective taking.
Okay. Number 3?
Number 3 is communicating. And communicating, people think of as literacy, but this is more than literacy, because in order for you to understand what I'm saying, you have to put aside your own thoughts and listen to what I'm saying and then respond. And so it involves inhibitory, all those executive functions that I've been talking about. So it's the ability to know how your words will be heard and to know how you want to say what you want to say in a way that can be heard and understood.
And know how they'll be received,
exactly.
too, right?
Exactly.
I mean, okay, next.
Next is making connections, and making connections is seeing how things go together. It's the stand for relationship. So for a little child, it's understanding that that picture of a dog is the dog. is the picture that you took of your own dog. But then it's understanding that those little squiggles on the page are words, and then understanding that those words stand for concepts and ideas. But you can sort of carry that further. It's the basis of all knowledge is that ability to see the connections among things, and then making unusual connections, which is the basis of creativity.
But most people, can't they make connections? I mean, that seems like almost a very base level of understanding, and unless you're intellectually impaired, it seems like it would be very natural.
Well, there are tests that researchers do to look at the ability to make connections. So they'll give you some pictures, and they'll say, how do these two pictures go together? Now I'm talking about a 4-year-old, 5-year-old. And then let's say it's two things that are blue and one thing that's red. Okay, well, the two things that are blue that go together. And then they'll say, and show me a way that the two other things go together in a different way, and then you can see that both
both are balls, maybe.
Exactly right. Exactly right. But then you make it much more complicated, and adults can have trouble with that.
Okay.
So those making unusual connections can be quite hard.
Okay, so we're up to 4.
We're up
you
to
have
4.
3
You're
more.
Good. That's good.
I'm good at counting, so that's good.
You can make
what
that.
are the 3 others?
The next one is critical thinking. That's looking for valid and accurate information. And if you think about the world we live in, where there's so much information, but how do you know that it's right information? How do you know that it's accurate information?
And how can you challenge it intellectually, right?
Exactly. And we want kids in our world not just to take what they read on the internet and assume that it's true or so forth. So we really want them. And there's a real interesting progression of how that develops. And the next skill after that, I think is a really important skill. It's taking on challenges. That's this one I call the 6th skill. But I used to think it was coping with stress. When I started to write the book, it was, we know that the people who do well in life are the people who can cope well with stress, but then, or are resilient if in the face of tough things happening, and all of us have tough things that happen. But then I realized that we want more than that from us and from our children. We want the people who can take on challenges. If someone says no, but they really believe that it's right, they can take on that challenge. And researchers study that. Carol Dweck, for example, has studied that by looking at if you give kids a couple of problems and then you say, here's the next problem and it's hard, or here's the next problem and it's not so hard. You might not learn as much, but it's not as hard. Who are the kids who take the easy problem and who are the kids who take the hard problem? And the kids who take the harder problem, the kids who can take on the challenge, who love the challenge, who want to learn something that's hard, are the kids who have a growth mindset. They understand that their brain is always developing. They understand that they're not just born with the capacities that they have, and the way we praise makes a difference.
Are they more likely to take chances too in their lives, or take risks that will then help the world in a way?
Yes, exactly. Reasonable risk, we hope. I mean, not crazy risks, but yes. Yes, that's exactly right. And that's why we want people who, if we think about all the success stories we read all the time, they're the people who got the 50 rejections and then won the Pulitzer Prize or so forth.
Right,
I mean, it's the people who can say.
Well, that's more perseverance than risk-taking, though, isn't it?
Well, it's perseverance, but it's also, it's not giving up, when giving up would be the easy thing to do.
Okay. I'm wondering which math problems my daughter would take, really, because I don't know.
The way you praise can change that right away. I mean, we taped an experiment with Carol Dweck where she just randomly picked some kids to get what she would call fixed mindset praise, which is, you are really smart. She picked some kids who would get growth mindset, which is, you are working so hard on that. Or, look, you tried that math problem this way and it didn't work, and then you tried it that way and it did work. So commenting on their effort or their strategies will encourage children to take on strategies, and you can change them. The kids who were praised for being smart would say, why aren't you very good at it? If they made a mistake. I mean, why didn't you, what happened if they made a mistake? And they would say, I guess I'm not very smart. I guess I can't really do it. And
so are you saying that you shouldn't say, wow, you're really smart? You should
every
say
once in a while, of course.
No, but you should really say, make it more effort-centered praise.
Exactly.
Like, you were working really hard. I'm really proud of how much you put into that lab report, that you stayed up till 2 a.m. Can you tell I'm talking from personal experience last night? Okay, so, and then finally, we're on the last one. What is that?
Self-directed engaged learning.
So that's somebody who can independently pursue a goal without having someone sort of...
People who are learning, who are curious. And kids don't learn unless they're around adults who learn. So the adults who are curious, who want to learn, they have a fire in their eyes, or the adults who are likely to keep the fire in children's eyes burning brightly.
It's like the study they did that kids who read more are those who watch their parents read more.
Exactly.
And so they really do model their behavior after their parents. Well, let me take a couple of these because the one on focus in particular, is that what you use the marshmallow test for, to sort of focus and self-control, right? Let's take a look at this video of these little kids. They were offered the option of having one marshmallow immediately or 2 marshmallows 15 minutes later. And you've got some very cute videotape of this experiment, so let's take a look.
Okay.
What we found is a very simple and direct way of measuring a competence that seems to make an important life difference.
A researcher tells these preschoolers that she's going to leave the room. If they wait for her to come back without eating the marshmallows, they'll get 2 marshmallows. Or they can ring the bell and she'll come back right away. But then they only get 1 marshmallow.
I won't ring the bell.
You won't ring the bell? Okay.
Looking at children over time, Dr. Michelle has found that being able to wait longer at 4 has some pretty powerful implications.
And what are those powerful implications? Is that that later in life they're more disciplined and have more self-control? Is that pretty much it?
Well, they are more likely to achieve their life goals. They have better relationships. They did better on their SAT tests.
I know, that's crazy, all because they waited 15 minutes for 2 marshmallows?
I mean, I think it is crazy. I probably would have eaten all 3, but...
Yeah, me too.
But, you know, actually, yes, the ability to be able to pursue your goals, in this case it was to have 2 marshmallows versus 1, and not go on automatic and just grab the marshmallow, is a very important skill. But I think a main point in Mind in the Making is that these skills can be taught if you're 14 or 40 or 4. It's not ever too late, and any child can learn them, any adult can teach them, and it's never too late.
Well, how do you do that, though? Let's say you want to reinforce sort of the ability to be disciplined and focused and have self-control.
We have people, parents from all over the country now writing into our website with what they're doing for kids of different ages. And we just got a blog from a mother who had a 5-year-old who really wanted a Nintendo game, and it was too expensive. The mother thought it was way too much money and said no, and this child persisted, wants it. The mother said no, persisted. And finally she thought, you know, it's not like her. She usually accepts no as no. And so she said, okay, she took out 3 jars, and in one jar she put save, another jar she wrote charity, and another jar she wrote spend. So she gave her $1 every week in 4 quarters, and she put 1 quarter into the save, 1 quarter into the charity, and they could decide what they were going to do for charity. I think this is a really nice way of teaching, and 2 quarters into the spend. And it took her a while, but she saved up enough money for that toy that she really wanted, and the mother didn't have to buy it for her. So that was really, I think, a good example of a way that a parent can teach children to have that discipline.
Do you think that too many parents, because they're exhausted, because they don't want their child to hate them, because they have a lot of guilt feelings for working, are too quick to say yes, and they're only encouraging sort of this instant gratification society? I mean, have you seen that in your research? A lot.
I have seen it. And we actually did one study on kids and asked them how often their parents were likely to do that. And, you know, it's not everyone, but there's a bigger proportion than we would like to see. I think it's easier to say no, but that's the quick fix for us.
It's easier to say yes.
Yeah,
I was going to say it's not easy to say no, and that's why so many people, even against their better judgment, you know, they have a headache or the kids wear them down, so they finally say mea culpa. Yes.
But you know, then you get into the gimmies, because once children have that little edge of power that actually makes them a little bit uncomfortable, to be honest, they'll start pushing you more and more and more, so you get the gimmies, and ultimately you get mad at them or something like that. If you could begin to figure out when do you say yes and when do you really say no and mean it, that works a whole lot better.
Yeah. And somebody wrote in actually after the evening news story, and it was posted on cbsnews.com. He or she says, the problem with this kind of test is that it only measures the kid from the options given to the kid, and it defines success on the researchers' terms. There are many people out there who have achieved all their goals through self-denial, who we would call successful, yet are unhappy. So I guess this opens up a whole can of worms, right? So people may have self-control, but maybe they have so much of it that they're somehow deprived, if I am understanding this email correctly?
Well, I don't have happiness as a life skill, but I do think that the reason that there's 7 life skills and not just 1 is that I'm really interested in kids who are whole emotionally, socially, and cognitive. So even though if you just had focus and self-control and that was the only life skill that you had, yeah, I can absolutely agree with your listener who wrote in. But if you're helping to promote all of these skills in your children in everyday fun ways over their lives, then I think you're going to have that emotional happiness as well as intellectual competence or so forth.
Let's talk about communication, because it seems to me in our high-tech society, our high-tech world, communicating has become increasingly challenging. We had a piece on the fact that 1/3 of all teenagers text at least 100 text messages a day now. And one of the psychologists, I think, that was in the piece questioned, and others certainly, and this is not brain surgery, that it's going to affect our ability to relate to one another, to have face-to-face conversations. Do you worry about that in terms of developing that particular life skill?
I do. The Kaiser Family Foundation recently found, when they went back 5 years later, they found that kids were between 8 and 18 were spending 6.5 hours a day on social media, texting and you know, all those sorts of things. And they thought it couldn't get higher, but it did. It got to 7.5 hours, and they were packing 11 hours of media, you know, more time certainly than they spend in school every day, these kids from 8 to 18 on average. What I think is, and I just went to a wonderful conference that was put on in memory of Fred Rogers. You know, if Fred had been alive today, would he be into social media?
I don't think so.
Well, they thought that he would, but they thought that what we need to do is to make sure that we're giving kids the
limits?
Limits and good social media. So it's not always the kind of, you know, pow, blow up kind of video games, but some of the skills, some of the social media, and it was in your piece that I was on, I don't know about a 2.5-year-old using an iPad, but it was that social media engages children the way they learn best. Obviously, the commercial people who are trying to sell to families and kids are going to use the best principles of learning to get kids involved. Why don't we use some of those principles in providing good educational experiences and good social media for kids, and also setting limits?
Yeah, but isn't too much too much,
Absolutely.
no matter how good it is? Let's
Setting
say
limits.
it's all quality. I mean, that is so important,
setting,
isn't it?
I agree with you, setting limits.
I know, because we got a lot of questions. A lot of people tweeted that. More Alive tweets, kids need to learn connectedness, electronic etiquette, and the importance of face-to-face discussions. Our onlineness is bad,
Yeah.
is what she's saying. I think a lot of people echo those sentiments. And I know as a parent, I worry about that. Not only are they sedentary because they spend so much time in front of their computer, but this virtual world isn't the real world.
It's true. I think also we have to think about what kind of role models we are for them. Because
That's
if we're
true.
sitting at the dinner table with our BlackBerry or our iPhone, we're showing them what we're telling them not to do.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right about that. And I'm sometimes guilty of that myself. And, you know, I remember hearing a pretty famous couple, they're now split up, but anyway, I digress. But they said they didn't answer the phone in their house between the hours of 5 and 8. And I thought that was such a great message. You know, they just actually had no kind of technological involvement for those 3 hours where they focused on talking to their kids and helping their kids. And I don't know if that could, I mean, this was a number of years ago, if that would even be possible today, given all the technology that surrounds us.
Well, I've talked to lots of parents who have rules for that, like they'll take an essential phone call. One woman who was a doctor, she would take only an essential phone call at her family time. And she had like a red thing, like a stop sign for her kids if it was really important, and they shouldn't interrupt her on the phone if she went off to, but a green if it was okay, and she was going to get off. I also think that having the television on is not just background noise. Dan Anderson, and we have videos of him, found that if you even have a benign, game show thing on in the background for a little child, they don't really focus and pay attention. So I think that our kids are learning to multitask really well. We really do need to promote the skill of focus.
I think so too, and I know that when I was in college, I couldn't do my homework while listening to music. A lot of people can,
Kids
but
can.
my brain couldn't really. I couldn't do. I had to do one or the other. I had to listen to the music or focus on my homework, and I think that's okay.
Yes.
Right. To only be able to have that singular focus.
Well, I ask every single person who tells me that they multitask all the time and life is just great. I say, but if you've got a really important thing to do, what do? And they all tell me that they have to just pay attention to that, because that's the way the brain works. So the brain is not a multitasker. The brain is more linear.
Yeah.
And even though we move quickly from one thing to the other, that's what we're doing. We're moving quickly from one thing to another rather than doing two things at the same time.
It's true, and it's so rude. Like if I'm reading my computer and I'm on the phone, my friends will start saying, I'm thinking about committing suicide, and I'll be like, really? Oh, okay. And because I'm really not listening to what they're saying. I'm reading my computer. They're saying, you're not listening to me. So I think it's also rude. Well,
kids have great devices to detect whether their kids are, whether their parents are listening. One boy would come, his parents would always say, "How was school today?" And he would throw in something ridiculous, like, maybe not, I'm thinking of committing suicide, but he'd say, "A goldfish was on the grass." And his parents would say, "Really? And what else happened?" And he'd go, not listening.
Yeah, it's true. It's really important. All right, let me go through some other tweets. One thing I wanted to touch on, because this is a bit of a pet peeve of mine, and it's kind of gaining a lot of speed in terms of sort of culturally, and that is this tendency of parents in this day and age to overpraise their kids. To have to give them self-esteem without portfolio.
Right.
Do you see that in your research as being a real problem? Because it only creates entitled adults who don't associate self-esteem with actual accomplishment, right?
Exactly. I think that we thought during the 80s and 90s that praise was a way of building self-esteem, but it really isn't. At least praise for personality, praise for competence. It's back to what we were talking about with Carol Dweck's research. She did a study and she found that 85% of parents thought that you built kids' self-esteem by saying you're wonderful, you're smart, you're brilliant, you're gorgeous, you're that sort of thing. And in fact, it makes kids nervous about holding on to that label. Well, if I'm so smart, I better not try that because maybe I won't look smart. And so it makes them less willing to take a risk, less willing to try, less willing. And we only learn by making mistakes. So it really is a problem. Kids won't challenge themselves. They won't take on challenges.
And parents often don't allow their kids to make mistakes or to experience disappointment because they're so protective. Ergo, everybody wins the trophy. Everybody's on the soccer team, and that can really go too far too, can it?
I agree with you.
All right, let's go through some.
And that's why I ended up writing a book, and we also have a book, which is a book with a V in it, and it's like a video book. And what that does is you can actually download it on your iPad or iPhone or computer, and you can watch the experiments on it. And that's why I wanted to bring the best of what we know in ways that inspire parents, not a guilt trip, but inspire them. So that
I wish I had read this when my kids were littler.
But it's never too late, Katie.
I would have done some things a little differently. You're right. Well, for my 14-year-old, I think my 18-year-old's a lost cause, and she's doing okay.
But my kid's in their 30s,
Really?
Oh, yeah, I learned a lot in writing this book that made me a much better parent, and I've got grown-up kids.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, let's go through. We're almost out of time, so let's go through a few more tweets. And you did this, by the way, some visual cliff experiment. I haven't seen that one yet.
Oh, it's so cool.
Well, let's take a look at this. This was done by Joseph Campos at the University of California at Berkeley. And then you can explain, if you could, what this is showing in terms of parenting or teaching kids.
we attempted to understand is the extent to which the nonverbal, facial communication coming from the mother to the child powerfully affected that baby's behavior. If the mother is posing a fear face, the baby typically does not cross this stair-step downward, this modified visual cliff. On the other hand, if the mother poses a smile or somehow poses a nonverbal communication that is not prohibitive but encouraging, the child is much more likely to cross over to her.
Okay, Ellen. Duh. I mean, what kind of parent, if they're trying to reinforce or have positive reinforcement for a particular behavior, is going to go, unless their child's in real danger?
That's an exaggeration, obviously. But what the fear face? But they were trained to do,
Yeah.
These are babies before they talk, so they were trained to try to just communicate with the face. If you think about it, when anything happens to us, we look around at the faces of the people near us to find out, like if the bus screeches to a stop, is it safe or not? We look around to see whether how people are reacting to know how we should feel about it. We are communicating whether the world is safe to explore or not with our faces. Now, there is a lot of research that I quote in the book on temperament and the kids who are more fearful versus the kids who are all over the place, and whether we are alarmist and whether we're intrusive. And you talked about being intrusive, always protecting the child, always trying to fix it, never letting it work. Those are the things that affect whether children are are inhibited
or self-confident, right?
Yes, exactly right. So that really tells us that our faces, not just our words, but that the children are reading our faces long before they can talk.
So we should be encouraging, obviously, unless it's inappropriate to be that way.
We should be intentional about what we want our faces to communicate. And I've shown that video to teachers, and teachers often don't think about what their faces look like to children. But I talked to a 7th grader in Chicago, and he said he walked into the class the first day of school, and he could tell what kind of year he was going to have from his teacher's face. And I said, why? And he said he could tell whether she cared or not about the kids or about him, and whether she cared or not about learning. And he was reading it in an instant, that face in an instant. And so I think that teachers hear that and they go,
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, in other words, be more mindful about what you're expressing non-verbally, right?
Right.
Can we do a couple of these tweets really quickly, and can we do them kind of lightning round style? Okay, Lara Spencer, who anchors The Insider, says, should we push our kids to keep up with their peers or let them learn and absorb at their own pace?
Learn and absorb at their own pace, unless they're feeling bad about feeling that they're behind, and then we have to look at why they're behind. But I think I'd rather have a kid go deeper than just go with lightning speed.
Okay. Lori Nelson tweets, negotiation skills are paramount. That was just her comment. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think that
you have to not over-negotiate, though. Don't you have to kind of establish the power is with the parent usually?
Well, here's what the research on kids in conflict has found is that the kids who are most likely to get into conflicts have like a missing link. They can't read. They can't take the perspectives. They can't read and understand what's really going on. They misinterpret other people's behavior. So before you need to help children, learn what were they thinking. Play that game about television ads or television shows or book you're reading, but have the kids learn to take perspectives. Then I think there's a 6-step problem-solving process that is like, what's the problem, and then have them come up with solutions, and then look at what would work and what wouldn't work about those solutions from multiple perspectives. Would it work for you, but would it work for me? And then have them come up with a solution to try. And I think that if you can teach them to negotiate, but in a way that takes the other person's perspective.
Or let them, isn't it a lot of it just explaining why you've made a decision instead of just kind of making it, it's not because I said so?
Exactly. The parent
Although
sets the rule.
once in a while you do have to say because I said
so. The parent sets the rule. So in that problem-solving process, if your kids are fighting in the back seat of the car, you say you can't fight in the back seat of the car, but what ideas do you have to stop fighting? That gets buy-in from the kids, but you're still setting the rule. And
Oh,
then
I
you
see.
say, what are the consequences for breaking that rule? So you not only have them brainstorm solutions and figure out whether that would work for everyone involved, but then you say, okay, if you break that rule, what's going to happen? So if you involve them that way, they're much more likely to learn to negotiate well and also follow your rules.
That's interesting. That takes a lot of work on the part of the parent, though. But I think it's, it
But
makes
you
it
do
more...
it for the the biggies, the things that are really driving you crazy. Your kids are fighting all the time in the backseat of the car, and you're going to crash into something because it makes you so crazy.
Yeah, I would just pull over, turn around, and scream at them, but that's probably not the best solution. D. Kennedy Jane, finally, I think we have time for one more, says, how do you strike a balance between teaching kids to be independent but still being nurturing and there for them? I think a lot of parents have this problem when it comes to homework, for example, or not knowing how much to help a child, because that, of course, is your natural impulse. So do you have any advice for parents in that arena?
And that's the wonderful thing about the book, and the book is that it's just filled with both solutions that come from the research and from parents. There, I think that you need to, I've forgotten what you asked.
Okay, that's okay. I'll just ask it again. A lot of parents want to help their children, but they also want to make sure their children become independent and self-reliant. So how do you balance those two desires?
Growth we used to think of as a linear line. It was like you're dependent, you're going to be independent. It's not. At every stage of growth for children, they have to learn new ways of reconnecting. So growth is much more cyclical of independence, dependence, independence, dependence, and there's an appropriate level for each age of the children. So I think you don't fix it for them, but the example that I just gave you of problem solving gives them an appropriate level of independence, but you're also setting the rules, you're taking care of them.
Well, let me ask you something more sort of practical. So let's say a fourth grader is having a hard time with his homework.
Okay.
So how much do you help? And how much do you encourage him to figure it out himself, even if he's getting very, very frustrated in the process?
I think...
And that's about the highest level of math I could handle.
There, I think what you do is you help them come up with a strategy, but you don't do their homework for them. So you say, you're getting really frustrated, what's the problem? And help them figure out what's standing in the way of their ability to do math. Or you might go through one problem with them so that you make sure that they understand it. Or you might find an old, cool teenager to come in and help them with the problems that you forgot how to do because you learned math so long ago, and that's what I did.
Right.
But I think that you give them strategies, but then those strategies can be like guardrails where they can begin to walk across the bridge, but be safe.
Sometimes it takes longer to allow a child to do it on his or her own.
I know.
And I think that's one of the problems of modern life is that they have so much homework, they're up for many hours, not necessarily in fourth grade, but later. And parents are so busy too, so it's a bit of a conundrum, I think.
That's like the gimmies. That's like giving in to your kids, and then they'll have the gimmies. In the short term, it takes longer. In the long term, it takes less time. Because if you come up with a solution for your kids not fighting in the back seat of the car, you're not pulling over the side and screaming at them. I would have done the same thing too. But you're not pulling over the side all the time. So you've solved at least a problem for as long as that works. Or if they have the gimmies to you every single time you walk into a store, we did a rule for walking into a store, which is you can have anything you want, but it can't have these chemicals in it, and it can't have sugar has to be more than the fourth ingredient. And so the kids could have some independence about what they picked at the store. I didn't have to, and they had a set amount of money too.
Right.
But I didn't have to say no, yes, no, yes, no, yes. And it took a while to teach that, but then it was easier afterwards.
And it taught them how to read labels their entire
Exactly.
life, right? And
Yes.
to avoid certain chemicals
Exactly.
in foods.
Exactly.
Well, Ellen Galinsky, I think this book is going to be very helpful to a lot of parents because you get so much parenting advice, I think, and it's sort of hard to separate, what's good and bad advice, but certainly you have a lot of research to back up some of your suggestions in the book. So
Well, thank you.
I really
From you,
appreciate
Katie,
your
I'm
being
thrilled.
here. Well, listen, it's a little late for me, but
No.
with 14 and 18, but as you said, never too late. Would you like a marshmallow? If you wait 15 minutes, you can have two.
Oh, I'll take all three.
You can have them all, actually. There you go. Thanks, Ellen.
Thanks.
And thanks, by the way, to all of you for tweeting your questions and, of course, your comments. And remember, you can check out all the episodes of our web show anytime at cbsnews.com. And now, a message from our sponsor, Dove.